alien princess disguised herself as a beggar, only to be saved by a human who changed her fate. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Princess Lyana, the stunning heir to the throne of the Terran Empire, had everything that one could wish for. She lived in a sprawling palace, surrounded by luxurious items, servants, and power. Yet, despite the wealth, the status, and the grandeur, her heart felt empty. The golden halls of the Terran palace echoed with the footsteps of her guards, and the distant hum of the Empire's great machines only served to remind her of her isolation. Life as a princess wasn't what Lyana had imagined when she was a child. Her entire existence had been planned for her, from royal duties to an arranged marriage that she had no say in. Every day, she felt more like a prisoner in her own home. Despite her royal status, she longed for something she could not have: freedom. A life without obligations. A life where she wasn't just a symbol of the Empire. That desire for freedom finally led her to make a decision. She would escape. Disguising herself as a beggar, she left the palace, hoping to live a life on her own terms. But as soon as she stepped onto the streets, reality hit her hard. The world outside her palace was harsh and unforgiving. People looked at her with contempt, mocking her fragile appearance as she limped along the cobbled streets, her clothing ragged and her face hidden beneath a torn hood. No one offered a helping hand. Everyone ignored her, as if she were invisible. The weight of her past life clung to her like a shadow, making her feel even more insignificant than she had ever felt in the palace. Then, just when she thought she couldn't go on, a stranger appeared. A human, Max, a man of modest means, but with a heart far larger than most. He didn't see the princess, the future ruler of the Terran Empire. He only saw a woman in need of help. His eyes softened as he saw her struggling, and without hesitation, he approached. His voice was gentle as he asked, "Are you okay? You don't look well." Max wasn't rich. He wasn't important. But in that moment, his kindness made him stand out more than any royal could. Lyana looked up, surprised by his compassion. For the first time in days, she felt seen, not as a princess, not as a symbol, but as a person. And that feeling would change everything. Now, back to Max. Max helped Lyana back to his small, humble home, a place that was far from the grand palace she had once called home. It was a simple cottage on the edge of town, with a roof that needed repairs and walls that had seen better days. Yet, it was warm, comfortable, and filled with the kind of peace that Lyana had never known. Max didn't ask any questions. He simply set her down on the couch, covering her with a blanket he found in the closet. Lyana, still disoriented and exhausted, looked around the room, her eyes scanning the simple furnishings. There were no jewels, no expensive tapestries, no grand chandeliers. Just basic furniture, a few bookshelves, and a table where Max often worked on his trade. It was so different from the palace, so humble, yet somehow it felt safer than any place she had ever known. Max returned with a glass of water and some bread, handing it to Lyana with a warm smile. "You need to eat and rest," he said kindly, though his voice held an edge of concern. Lyana took the bread but didn't eat right away. She just stared at him, her mind swirling with the events of the past few hours. How had she gone from being the future queen of an empire to being a beggar on the streets, saved by a stranger she never expected to meet? And now, here she was, in a stranger's home, with no way to return to the life she had once known. "Why did you help me?" Lyana finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Max looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly in confusion. "What do you mean? You needed help. I couldn't just leave you out there." Lyana shook her head, still struggling to understand. "But I'm not just anyone. I'm the Princess of Terran. You must know who I am." Max paused for a moment, his expression unreadable. He had seen her distress on the streets, but he had never expected this. "I knew you were important," he said quietly, "but that didn't matter. You were hurting, and no one else was offering help. I couldn't just walk away." Lyana looked at him, her eyes softening. She had been taught all her life that she was different, that her position made her superior to others. But Max saw something in her that no one else had. The human side of her, the part that was just like any other person. She wasn't just a princess. She was a woman, vulnerable and in need of help. She took a bite of the bread, the simple meal giving her the strength to continue. She had never felt so humbled. As she chewed, she couldn't help but reflect on her life in the palace. It had been filled with luxury, but also with rules, expectations, and constant surveillance. She had never been free. Here, in this small, quiet cottage, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, freedom. But she couldn't stay here forever. She had to return to the palace, to her responsibilities. There was the matter of her arranged marriage, the empire, the people she had sworn to serve. But how could she go back after what had happened? Max sat across from her, his eyes full of understanding. He didn't say anything for a while, giving her space to think. Finally, after a long silence, he spoke again. You don't have to go back, you know. Lyana looked up at him, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. What do you mean? Max stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the moonlit sky. You've been given a second chance. You don't have to go back to a life that's been forced on you. You can make your own choices, live your own life. You're not bound by the palace, by your title. Lyana felt a flicker of hope. Could it be possible? Could she really have a life of her own? She had always felt trapped, as if her life was not her own. But now, Max's words made her wonder if there was more to life than just being a princess. Could she have a future without all the pressure and expectations? She stood up, feeling a strange sense of freedom in her chest. Maybe I don't want to go back, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Max turned to face her, his eyes full of warmth. Then don't. You deserve to be happy, Lyana. You deserve to live a life where you can choose your own path. Lyana smiled, the first real smile she had given in what felt like ages. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was in control of her own fate. And for that, she was grateful to Max. But even as she began to feel a sense of possibility, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She was still a princess, and her family wouldn't give up on her that easily. But maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to live the life she had always dreamed of. And with Max by her side, anything seemed possible. As the days passed, Lyana found herself growing more accustomed to life in Max's small cottage, a life that was so different from the one she had left behind in the palace. She had never imagined that a simple life, without the grandeur and the endless obligations, could bring so much peace. Max, despite his humble origins, had become her anchor in this new world. He didn't treat her like a princess, he treated her like a person, with kindness and respect. It was something Lyana had never truly experienced before, not even in the palace, where people were always seeking favor or recognition. She began to feel a growing sense of independence, something that had been stifled in her royal life. Max taught her things she had never known, like how to grow simple vegetables in a garden, how to cook hearty meals over a small fire, and how to find joy in the little things. The world outside, which she had once feared, was now becoming a place of comfort, with each passing day bringing her closer to the life she had always wanted. But no matter how much she enjoyed her time with Max, Lyana knew she couldn't hide forever. Her absence would be noticed, and soon, her family would send someone to find her. She couldn't escape her responsibilities forever. One evening as they sat by the fire, Max looked at her, his expression serious. You know you can't stay here forever, right? Lyana looked down into the flickering flames, her heart heavy. She had known this moment would come, but hearing it out loud made it feel all the more real. I know, she replied softly, but I don't know what to do. I can't go back to the palace. I can't live that life anymore. Max sighed and leaned back against the wall, his eyes softening. You have to decide, Lyana. You have a choice now. You don't have to go back to a life that makes you miserable, but you also can't stay here forever. You have your own future to think about. His words struck her like a lightning bolt, the truth of them hitting her deeply. She had always felt trapped by her duties, by her title, but she had never thought that she could choose a different path. Could she really live a life outside of the palace? Could she be free, even if it meant leaving behind everything she had ever known? I've been thinking about it, Lyana admitted, her voice shaking. But it's not easy. I have obligations, responsibilities, people who are counting on me. I can't just turn my back on all of that. Max stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. No one is asking you to turn your back on everything. But you have to decide what's best for you. You're not just a princess, you're a person with your own dreams, your own desires. You deserve to have a life that makes you happy. Lyana looked up at him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I don't even know what will make me happy anymore, she whispered. Everything I've ever known feels so far away, like it was never real. Max smiled softly, his thumb gently brushing away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. Then start with what you know. You know what it's like to be free, even if it's just a little. You've seen what life can be like without the pressure of a title, the weight of a crown. And you've seen what it's like to be loved and cared for, just for who you are. Lyana's heart swelled with emotion. It was true. She had felt something here with Max that she had never felt in the palace. She had felt seen, heard, understood. For the first time, she felt like she had a choice. As the days turned into weeks, Lyana began to see the world in a new light. She realized that she didn't have to be bound by her royal duties. She could choose to live her own life, on her own terms. The fear that had held her back began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. But her decision wasn't easy. She knew that returning to the palace would bring danger, that her family would not let her go without a fight. But for the first time in her life, Lyana felt ready to fight for herself, to fight for the future she wanted. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that with Max by her side, she could face whatever came next. The next morning, after a long night of contemplation, Lyana stood at the door of the cottage, looking out at the world beyond. She knew that the life she had once known was over, but that didn't have to be a bad thing. It was just the beginning of something new. Max stood beside her, his presence steady and comforting. You ready? He asked. Lyana took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settle within her. Yes, she said, her voice firm. I'm ready. With that, they stepped out into the unknown, together, ready to face whatever the future held. As Lyana and Max walked away from the cottage, the world seemed different to her, filled with possibility and uncertainty. They moved cautiously, leaving behind the safety of the humble home she had come to cherish, stepping into the unknown. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light over the rolling hills ahead. But for Lyana, the warmth of the morning was overshadowed by the weight of the decision she had made. She wasn't running away from her past. She was choosing to embrace a new future, one that she could shape on her own terms. Max was beside her, walking in silence, his steady presence a quiet reassurance. He had become more than just a stranger who had helped her. He had become her protector, her companion, and perhaps even something more. They walked together for hours, the path ahead winding through dense forests and open fields. And although they were miles away from the palace, Lyana's heart remained heavy with the knowledge that her family would not give up easily. Her absence would surely be noticed by now, and she could already imagine the soldiers sent to find her, the whispers of betrayal, the accusations of abandoning her duty. Her mind kept returning to the question, could she really leave everything behind? Was it possible to turn her back on her heritage, her family, her people? They stopped for a break by a bubbling stream, the sound of the water washing over Lyana's thoughts. She sat down on a large rock, her eyes gazing into the distance as Max set out a small meal they had packed along the way. She didn't realize how hungry she was until she saw the food. She took a bite, savoring the simple but satisfying taste. You seem quiet, Max said, sitting beside her. What's on your mind? Lyana hesitated, unsure of how to express the turmoil inside her. I'm just thinking, she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. About everything. About what's waiting for me back at the palace, and what I'm leaving behind. I can't just pretend like my life before doesn't exist, but at the same time, I can't go back to it. I don't know if I'm strong enough to walk away. Max placed his hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and grounding. You don't have to do it alone, Lyana. You have me. And whatever comes next, we'll face it together. You've already shown courage by making this choice. It's not easy, but it's your choice to make. Lyana nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude for Max's words. His support meant more to her than she had realized. As the day went on, the reality of her decision settled in. She could no longer return to the life of privilege and power she had once known, but she was beginning to understand that freedom came with its own set of challenges. It was a life of uncertainty, but it was also a life where she could choose her own path. And that was worth fighting for. By the time they reached a small village as the sun began to set, Lyana felt a new sense of purpose. They found an inn to rest for the night. A modest building with a thatched roof and a welcoming warmth that felt more like home than the palace ever had. Max rented a room, and they sat down to a quiet dinner, the weight of the world finally starting to lift off Lyana's shoulders. As they ate, Max spoke about the village, its people, and the simple joys of living without the constant pressure of duty. Lyana listened, her heart swelling with a sense of belonging she had never felt before. She realized that she wasn't just walking away from the palace. She was walking toward something better. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was in control. She wasn't a prisoner of her title anymore. She was Lyana, a person with hopes and dreams of her own. The following days were filled with uncertainty as Lyana and Max traveled further from the city, avoiding the roads that might lead to the palace. They took the long way around, through forests and across rivers, never staying in one place for too long. Lyana began to feel the weight of her decision, but at the same time, she also felt a deep sense of freedom. It wasn't the freedom she had once imagined, a life without responsibility, but the freedom to choose her own fate. And with Max by her side, she felt like anything was possible. But Lyana knew that her journey wasn't over. She couldn't hide forever, and sooner or later, her past would catch up with her. Yet, as they sat by a campfire one evening, with the stars above and the crackling of the fire filling the air, she felt at peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was ready to face it. No matter what came next, she was no longer the princess of Terran. She was simply Lyana, and for the first time in her life, that was enough. Days turned into weeks as Lyana and Max traveled further into the unknown, crossing vast stretches of land and winding through unfamiliar towns. The quiet life she had dreamed of was slowly becoming a reality, but it wasn't as simple as she had imagined. Each new place they visited brought fresh challenges, and Lyana realized that freedom wasn't the escape she once thought it would be. The weight of her decision to leave the palace still hung heavily over her, and though she had the freedom to choose her own path, she found herself haunted by the people she had left behind, the ones who had once depended on her. Despite these challenges, she couldn't deny the new sense of peace she had found in the simplicity of life with Max. He had become her anchor, her constant support through the uncertain journey. His kindness and understanding had helped her more than she could ever express, and as the days passed, she realized just how deeply she had come to care for him. One evening, as they sat together by a fire in a small village, Max turned to her with a serious expression. "You know," he began, "I've been thinking about the future. You've come so far, but there's always going to be someone looking for you. The palace won't just forget about you." Lyana looked into the flickering flames, her heart heavy with the truth of his words. She had known this moment would come, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel all the more real. She had always known that one day, her past would catch up with her, but she had hoped for more time. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I don't know what to do. I can't go back to the life I had. I can't be the person they want me to be." Max reached over, placing a comforting hand on hers. "You don't have to be anyone other than yourself, Lyana. You've already shown incredible courage in making the choice to leave. But you also need to think about what you want your future to look like." His words resonated with her, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly consider the possibility of building a life outside of the palace. She had spent so long feeling trapped, caught between duty and desire, but now she was beginning to see that she had the power to shape her own future. Max's encouragement made her realize that she wasn't alone in this decision. She had him by her side, someone who believed in her and supported her, even when the weight of the world seemed unbearable. As the days passed, Lyana grew stronger. She began to learn how to navigate life without the protection of her royal title, relying on her own skills and the lessons Max had taught her. She worked alongside him, helping with repairs, cooking meals, and learning about the world beyond the palace walls. For the first time in her life, she felt truly useful, her purpose not defined by her title, but by her actions. But despite her growing sense of self, Lyana knew that her past would eventually catch up with her. One day, as they were traveling through a small town, They came across a group of travelers who recognized her immediately. Princess Lyana, one of them called out, his voice filled with surprise. Max immediately stepped in front of her, his body tense as he prepared to defend her. Lyana's heart raced, and for a moment, she felt a surge of panic. But she quickly composed herself and stepped forward, meeting the stranger's gaze. "I'm not a princess anymore," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "I'm just Lyana, and I've chosen a different path." The man looked at her, his expression softening. "I understand," he said quietly. "But there are those who won't let you go so easily. They will come for you." Lyana's heart sank at his words, but she stood tall, refusing to show any weakness. She had made her choice, and she was determined to stand by it. "I'm not afraid," she replied, her voice strong. "I've already made the hardest decision of my life. I won't go back." As the man left, Max turned to her, his expression filled with concern. "Lyana, this is just the beginning. We can't keep running forever." Lyana nodded, her mind racing. She knew he was right. The time would come when she would have to face her past head-on. But for now, she had the strength to keep moving forward. She had found something in herself she never knew existed. The courage to live for herself, to make her own choices, and to embrace the life she had always wanted. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice steady. "Together." And with that, they continued their journey, not knowing what the future held, but knowing they would face it side by side. Weeks went by, and the days grew colder as Lyana and Max continued their journey. They moved deeper into the wilderness, away from the familiar roads and villages, and closer to the unknown. Every day, they faced new obstacles, treacherous weather, rugged terrain, and the constant threat of being discovered. But through it all, Lyana felt more alive than she ever had in the palace. The fear of being caught was always there, lingering in the back of her mind. But with each passing day, she grew stronger, more confident in her choices. Max had become her rock, and together, they were learning to survive in a world that was far harsher than the one she had known. They came across a small town one afternoon, hidden in the valley of a distant mountain range, and decided to rest there for a few days. The people in the town were kind, though they eyed the strangers with some curiosity. Lyana kept her hood low and her face hidden, knowing that she couldn't risk being recognized. Max, ever the protector, kept a close watch on their surroundings. One evening, as they sat by the fire in a small inn, Lyana found herself thinking about the future. It had been weeks since she had left the palace, and although she had found some peace in this new life, there was still the question of what would happen next. She couldn't run forever. She knew she had to face the consequences of her decision, even if that meant returning to the palace to face her family. But the thought of going back filled her with dread. The life she had left behind seemed like a distant memory now, a life she could never return to. She had changed, and she didn't know if she could ever fit back into that world again. Max looked at her, sensing her unease. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" he asked quietly. Lyana nodded, not needing to say anything. She knew that he understood. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid of what will happen when they find me. Afraid of what I'll have to face." Max reached across the table and took her hand in his. "You're not alone in this," he said firmly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You've already made the hardest choice. Now it's time to make the next one." Lyana squeezed his hand, grateful for his support. "But what if I'm not ready? What if I can't go back? What if everything is different now?" Max smiled gently, his eyes full of understanding. "You've already faced the hardest thing, Lyana. You left the life that was given to you, and you chose your own path. You've already proven you have the strength to make it through anything. You're ready for whatever comes next." Lyana looked into his eyes, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was ready. It wasn't going to be easy, but she had already taken the first step. She had chosen to live for herself, not for anyone else. And that was something no one could take away from her. The next morning, they left the town and continued on their journey. They knew that the road ahead was still uncertain, but Lyana no longer felt the weight of the past bearing down on her. She was free in a way she had never been before. As they traveled, Lyana found herself thinking more about the future. The question of what would happen when she faced her family was still there, but it didn't feel as overwhelming anymore. She knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. And with Max by her side, she felt like she could do anything. The future was still unknown, but for the first time, Lyana wasn't afraid. She had chosen her path, and no matter where it led, she would walk it with her head held high. Weeks turned into months as Lyana and Max continued their journey, and with each passing day, Lyana began to feel the weight of her decision more and more. The quiet life she had once dreamed of now felt like a distant memory, replaced by the reality of constant movement, uncertainty, and fear. Every day, they traveled further into the wilderness, and although she found comfort in Max's presence, the world around her was full of reminders of what she had left behind: the palace, her family, her responsibilities. There were times when Lyana would sit by the campfire at night, staring into the flickering flames, lost in thought. She couldn't deny that she had made the right choice, but the fear of being discovered, of facing the consequences of her escape, was always there, lurking in the back of her mind. Max noticed her moments of silence and would often sit beside her, offering a comforting presence. "You're thinking about going back, aren't you?" he would ask, his voice gentle. Lyana would nod, the weight of her past pressing down on her. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted one night, her voice barely above a whisper. "I left everything behind, but sometimes I feel like I'm running away from who I am." Max placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch steady and reassuring. "You didn't run away from who you are, Lyana. You're just choosing a different path. You have every right to decide your own future." Lyana smiled weakly, grateful for his unwavering support. She had come to depend on him more than she realized, and with every passing day, she felt herself growing stronger. She wasn't the same person who had fled the palace in fear. She was someone different now, someone who had the courage to build a new life. But as the days went on, the reality of her situation became harder to ignore. They had been on the road for months, and Lyana knew it wouldn't be long before the palace sent someone to find her. The thought of being discovered filled her with a mix of dread and uncertainty. What would her family do when they found out she had run away? Would they try to force her back? Or would they finally accept that she had made her choice? It was a question that lingered in her mind every day, and as much as she wanted to push it aside, she couldn't escape it. One evening, as they set up camp in a dense forest, Max turned to her, his expression serious. "Lyana, we need to talk." Lyana looked up, her heart racing. "What is it?" Max took a deep breath, as if choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking. We can't keep running forever. Sooner or later, someone will find us. I don't want you to be caught off guard when that happens." Lyana nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of his words. "I know," she said softly. "I've been thinking the same thing." Max stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "When the time comes, you'll have to make a decision. You can't hide forever. You'll have to face your family, face the consequences of what you've done. But no matter what happens, I'll be right there beside you." Lyana's heart swelled with gratitude for his support, but a part of her still hesitated. Could she really face the palace again? Could she stand before her family and explain why she had left everything behind? The thought terrified her, but she knew Max was right. She couldn't keep running from her past forever. The next day, they continued their journey, the weight of Max's words hanging heavily in the air between them. As they traveled, Lyana found herself questioning everything she had known about herself, about her family, and about the life she had once thought was her destiny. She had been raised to believe that her life was not her own, that she had been born to serve the empire, to fulfill the expectations placed upon her. But now, she was beginning to realize that she had the power to choose her own path, to shape her own future. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, Lyana felt like she could make her own decisions. And that, more than anything, was worth fighting for. As they reached a small village on the edge of a mountain range, Lyana felt a growing sense of resolve. She had made her choice, and now she had to face whatever came next. There would be no more running, no more hiding. She was ready to face her past, to confront the life she had left behind, and to find out if there was still a place for her in a world that had once seemed so foreign to her. Max, as always, was by her side, his unwavering support a steadying force in the midst of the uncertainty. Together, they would face whatever the future held. As Lyana and Max made their way deeper into the village, the reality of what lay ahead was beginning to settle in. The path they had been on for so long was reaching its end, and with every step, Lyana felt her heart pounding louder. She could feel the weight of her past, The palace, the expectations, the responsibility, pressing down on her once again. She had run so far from it, yet the day was coming when she would have to face it. Max, ever the steady presence, noticed her growing tension and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We don't have to make any decisions today," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "We'll take it one step at a time, together." Lyana nodded, trying to quiet the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. They reached the edge of the village, and as they walked through the quiet streets, Lyana couldn't help but notice how peaceful it was. The sounds of children playing, the smell of fresh bread baking from the local bakery, and the warm glow of the sun setting behind the mountains created an atmosphere of calm and contentment that felt so different from the chaos of her old life. She couldn't help but wonder if it was possible to ever feel that same sense of peace again, especially with what was coming. After finding a small inn where they could rest for the night, Lyana sat by the window, gazing out at the stars. The vastness of the night sky reminded her of how far she had come, and yet, it also felt overwhelming. She had spent so many years living within the confines of the palace, controlled by duty and expectations. Now, she was free, but with that freedom came uncertainty. She had made her choice, but she still didn't know what it would cost her. Max came to sit beside her, his presence calming as always. "What's on your mind?" he asked, sensing her unease. Lyana sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for what's next," she admitted. "I keep thinking about what I left behind, about the people I might never see again, and the consequences. I'm afraid of what might happen when they find me." Max looked at her with a deep understanding. "It's normal to be afraid. You've been through a lot. But remember, you made the decision that's best for you. You're not just running away. You're choosing a future where you can finally be who you want to be." Lyana met his gaze, her heart swelling with gratitude for the unwavering support he had given her. "I don't want to go back to being someone I'm not," she said quietly. "I don't want to live a life that's dictated by other people's expectations." Max nodded, his expression softening. "You don't have to. You're not the same person who left the palace. You've grown, you've changed, and you have the strength to face whatever comes your way." Lyana smiled, feeling a sense of comfort in his words. He was right. She had changed. She wasn't the frightened princess who had fled from her responsibilities. She was someone who had found the courage to take control of her own life. And now, she had to trust that she could face whatever challenges awaited her. The next morning, as the sun began to rise over the village, Lyana and Max made their way to the town square. The villagers greeted them warmly, offering small gifts and food, welcoming them as if they were old friends. For the first time in a long while, Lyana felt a sense of belonging. These people didn't know who she was or what she had left behind, and yet, they treated her with kindness and respect. It was a stark contrast to the cold indifference of the palace. As they settled into the village for the next few days, Lyana found herself growing more comfortable with her decision. She knew that the time would come when she would have to face her family, but for now, she was content to be with Max, to experience a life that was free from the expectations of royalty. She had made her choice, and though it was still filled with uncertainty, it was her choice. And that, more than anything, gave her the strength to face whatever the future held. As the days passed, the quiet life Lyana had longed for seemed to grow more real with each passing moment. The village had become a place where she could breathe freely, where she was no longer weighed down by the constraints of her royal bloodline. The simple pleasures of everyday life, the sound of children laughing in the streets, the smell of freshly baked bread wafting from the local bakery, and the peaceful rhythm of life, felt like a dream come true. But despite the peace she had found, the nagging feeling of her past, of the people she had left behind, lingered. She could no longer deny that sooner or later, the world she had fled would catch up with her. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting a warm golden light over the village, Lyana sat outside their small cottage, deep in thought. Max, who had been by her side through every step of this journey, noticed the troubled look on her face. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lyana nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I can't help it," she said quietly. "I've made a life for myself here, but there's still a part of me that's afraid. Afraid of facing the consequences of leaving everything behind. And most of all, afraid of going back." Max sat down beside her, his presence always a comfort. "You've come so far, Lyana," he said softly. "You've built something real here, something of your own. You've proven that you don't have to live a life defined by anyone else's expectations. And now, when the time comes, you'll face your past on your terms." Lyana sighed, feeling the weight of his words. She had always lived her life according to the rules set for her, first by her parents, then by the empire, and finally by the royal court. But here, in this small village, she had found a freedom she had never known before. A freedom to live, to make choices for herself, to be the person she truly wanted to be. She turned to Max, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "You've been with me every step of the way, and I don't know if I could have done this without you." Max smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "You're stronger than you know, Lyana," he said gently. "You've made it this far, and no matter what happens next, I'll be right here beside you. We'll face whatever comes together." Lyana smiled back, feeling the truth of his words settle deep within her. She had come to realize that it wasn't the past she had to fear, but the future, and that the only way to move forward was to face whatever it held. The next morning, after a quiet night of reflection, Lyana made the decision. She would no longer hide from her past. She would face her family, her responsibilities, and whatever consequences awaited her. But she would do it on her own terms. She stood up, the morning sun casting a golden light over the land, and turned to Max. "I'm ready," she said, her voice strong and determined. "Let's go." Max nodded, a proud smile on his face. "Together," he said, his voice steady. And so, they began their journey back. The road ahead was uncertain, and Lyana knew there would be challenges, but she also knew that she was no longer the person who had fled the palace in fear. She was someone who had chosen to live for herself, and that made all the difference. As they walked together, Lyana felt the weight of her past lifting, replaced by a new sense of purpose. She didn't know what the future held, but with Max by her side, she was ready to face it, no matter what. For the first time in her life, she was free, truly free, to create her own destiny.